and all present here, on the behalf of the AML committee and TISS fraternity, I welcome you all for the 11th Ambedkar Memorial Lecture. The purpose of the lecture is to create opportunities for students and academia to reflect on the works and life of Dr. Ambedkar and its relevance to the present time. On this occasion, we invite some of the best minds to reflect on thoughts and ideas of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Today, we have assembled here to celebrate the 11th Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, and the topic for the day is Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. Now, we proceed with the inauguration. I invite our guest speaker, Dr. Narendra Jadhav, sir, chairperson of the event, our director, Professor S. Parshuraman, and our faculty, Professor Ramaya, on the dais to commemorate the evening. Privilege to me to introduce the speaker of the 11th Ambedkar Memorial Lecture this evening. Dr. Narendra Jadhav is a distinguished economist, scholar, thinker, teacher, policy maker, public intellectual, and best-selling author. He has written prolifically in the areas of policy, education, and economics, which include 30 books and 12 books on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. In addition, he has authored 27 major official reports, contributed around 200 research papers in professional journals, and delivered numerous lectures in national and international fora. He has shown his strength in various public policy and financial institutions at national and international level, which includes Reserve Bank of India, Planning Commission of India, National Advisory Council, International Monetary Fund, and as a Chief Economic Counselor for Afghanistan. Dr. Jadhav is a recipient of as many as 65 national and international awards for his contributions to the field of economics, education, literature, culture, and social work. These include 4 honorary D.Litt degrees and the title of the Commander of the Order of the Academic Palms by the Government of France. Currently, he is working as a professor, Durgabai Deshmukh Chair in Social Development, Equity and Human Security at Council for Social Development, New Delhi. Once again, on behalf of TISS, I welcome you, sir. Without taking much time, I would like to request Dr. Narendra Jadhav to deliver the speech.
Thank you, Minal, for a very generous introduction. Well, my friend Professor Parshuraman, my other friend Professor Ramaya, and distinguished invitees here, and my student friends. It's indeed a great pleasure as well as an honor to be here this evening, and at the very outset, I must tell you that personally, and my brother is also here with me, the reason why my brother has also come with me today is because you might not know, in fact I'm sure that you do not know, that TISS, my family has been associated with TISS for a very long time. And when we were growing up in Vada, in central part of Mumbai, at that time, the TISS students, I think they were doing Master of Social Work or something, and they used to come there regularly, twice a week. And as children, this is a very old story, 40, 50 years ago, and as children, we used to wait for them to come because they used to come and tell stories and they used to play games, and we really have had a very long association with Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Therefore, I feel doubly privileged and indeed honored to be here to give a speech. I would like to commend the students, all of you, the students of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, for organizing this Dr. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture. And I believe this is the 11th lecture in the series, and is one of those activities which are basically taking place with the initiative of the students and with the support from director and others in the institute. And I really wish to commend the students of the ISS for having instituted and consistently organized this series of lectures in honor of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. The subject that is given to me is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar as an economist. Now, this is a subject many of you would know is a subject which is very close to my heart, and I wrote the first book on this subject, which was also my first book in 1992. And there is a very, very interesting story why I was prompted to write that book. You know, I spent 31 years in the Reserve Bank of India, and it is open secret now, everybody in RBI would know, that for about 20 years, I used to be the speech writer for all the governors of RBI, from Manmohan Singh to Dr. Y.V. Reddy. So, that's not the point is this. You know, I learned a lot by working with them rather than their benefiting, because they're all great people. The reason why I'm telling you is that during one of those debates, and I used to have access to all of them, that time I was not very senior, Dr. Rangarajan, I wrote maximum number of speeches for Dr. Rangarajan. And he gave very large number of speeches as compared to other governors. And in one of the speech, you know, we discussed the draft, and while I was leaving, and the subject that time was what in economics is called automatic monetization of budget deficit. So while leaving, I made a statement that Dr. Ambedkar said something very similar to what I have written in the draft. So he looked at me, you know, he was sitting and I was standing. He looked at me and said, "Why would Ambedkar say that?" I said, "Why should he not say that?" He said, he was a legal luminary. What did Ambedkar know of economics? Dr. Rangarajan said, again, this is ignorance. Dr. Rangarajan said, what did Ambedkar know of economics? You know, he was a great legal luminary and a constitutional lawyer. So I had to tell him that Dr. Ambedkar not only was a great constitutional lawyer, he was also an economist, and he did not have one but two PhDs, one PhD and another Doctor of Science degree from the great universities like Columbia University and London School of Economics, and both of them were in economics. So Dr. Ambedkar was basically an economist. He also had a degree in law. So his basic training was economics, and I have to tell him that. But when I came out, I had a debate within my mind, and I said, if one of the finest economists of our country does not know that Dr. Ambedkar was an economist, then there is something seriously wrong. Because, you know, how is it that it is not known why Dr. Ambedkar was an economist? And I thought about it, and I talked to many people. But that was the time when I decided that I'm going to bring out a book, a short book on Dr. Ambedkar as an economist, which is what I did. And that was also the year of birth centenary of Dr. Ambedkar, 1991. This book was brought out immediately after that year. I did that, and that was my first book. I wrote that in English as well as in Marathi. In English it is called Dr. Ambedkar, Economic Thoughts and Philosophy. In Marathi it is called Dr. Ambedkar, Arthik Vichar and Tattvagnyan. Now, after all these years, 25 years, I have now revised that book again. Because that time it was a short book, about 100 pages, 100 plus pages. Now a full-fledged book was written, has been written. And this is a big one, about 350 pages or so. And yesterday, I came to Mumbai. Along with this, I went to the Reserve Bank of India yesterday with the copy of the book. What I want to do is that I would like to request, I have requested the Governor of Reserve Bank of India not only to write a foreword to that book, but also release that book in the Reserve Bank of India, because it was Dr. Ambedkar, and most people do not know this, he played some role even in the establishment of the Reserve Bank of India. So, you know, these are the facets which are not known, and that is why I was very happy that Professor Ramaiah suggested you speak on Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. Dr. Ambedkar was an economist by his basic training, as was told to you here, and the slideshow, very nice slideshow was presented. In 1915, Dr. Ambedkar did his master's in economics from Columbia University. In 1917, he finished his PhD in economics from Columbia University, and then he went over to the continent. He went to Europe, and in London School of Economics, he did Doctor of Science. And while doing his Doctor of Science degree, he also registered himself in the law, in the Gray's Inn, the picture of which was shown here. So he did the barristry as well as the Doctor of Science degree together, and he finished with all his education in 1923. So he was basically an economist by training, and in addition, he also had a legal degree. Now, having finished his higher education, Dr. Ambedkar came back, and I'm going to review all that he did about economics. But before that, you know, when the book was released, my original book was released in 1992, 1993, that time there were a series of speeches that I gave, and there were a number of television shows where debates took place about Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. So I raised this issue that why do you think Dr. Ambedkar is not recognized as an economist in spite of all his work and all his training? There were two explanations which were given to me by very influential people. One of the explanations was that, well, Dr. Ambedkar, you know, this is part of our intellectual slavery. Indians are known for intellectual slavery. When it comes to praising a foreigner, we bend backwards to do that, but when it comes to praising our own, we try to keep that down. This is considered as one of the explanations for why Dr. Ambedkar is not recognized. Another explanation that was given to me, offered to me in the TV discussions during those days, was that Dr. Ambedkar did so much work in so many different fields that possibly the contribution that he did in economics must have been overshadowed by his contribution in so many areas. Both of these explanations are hollow. They do not hold any water, simply because there were two counter-examples which immediately come to our mind. One is Dadabhai Nauroji, and the second one is Madhav Govinda Ranade. Now both of these gentlemen, they are recognized as great economists, and they are the ones who also made a lot of contribution in so many different areas. But there, it did not overshadow their work in economics, which has been recognized, whereas in case of Ambedkar, that did not happen. So there is something more than that. Another argument that I think must be made is this, that one can understand why Dr. Ambedkar was not recognized as economist by the professionals or the economists or the highly educated people. But what about the economic historians? In economics, and those of you who have studied economics would know that there is a sub-discipline called economic history, where everything done by most economists, Indian economic thought, you will find that mentioned there. Do you know there are two big books, were there until 1991, now it has been changed, but there were two very famous books on the history of Indian economic thought, where every small guy, every Tom, Dick and Harry who wrote 3 articles maybe is represented there, but the fellow who had 2 PhDs, 1 PhD and 1 Doctor of Science, is not mentioned even in a footnote. So that again goes to show that there is something very wrong. And this is sad because Dr. Ambedkar, by branding him as the leader of downtrodden, by branding him as the leader of Dalits, we are doing injustice to this person, great person, because Dr. Ambedkar was not only for Dalits. Of course he was their savior. Nobody can deny that. But his thoughts were never confined to Dalits alone. He always wrote, always did his all work, keeping nation in front of him. And therefore, branding him as a Dalit or a Dalit leader alone is doing a grave injustice to him. And the Indians, we all Indians have done a great disservice to ourselves by not benefiting the thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar. And therefore, it is very important that we all must understand the economic thoughts and philosophy of Dr. Ambedkar. If you look at Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to economics, it can be clearly divided into two phases. First phase is when he was a student in England and in America. America first and then England. And second phase where he was not a student, but he was a practitioner, he was a politician, and he was performing many other roles. So the first part, as a student, of which we saw some interesting slides, Dr. Ambedkar's 3 books on economics that he wrote, they were all part of his thesis or dissertation for the advanced degrees. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then about the second part of Dr. Ambedkar's life and times, where he did not write any book on economics after coming back. But everything that he did had an imprint of his being an economist, including the Constitution of India. The Indian Constitution, my friends, had more provisions in economics than any other constitution in the world, simply because the principal architect of that constitution was economist. So although Dr. Ambedkar did not write any book on economics per se, after coming back, he wanted to, and he has written in the preface of one of his books, but he could not because he was in the whirlpool of the political movement and the social rising that he was leading. But let's start with the part 1 and then go to the part 2. In the part 1, I want to briefly describe to you in as non-technical manner as possible Dr. Ambedkar's contribution, the scholarly contribution of Dr. Ambedkar. And this contribution, as I said, his thesis or dissertation for MA degree, for PhD degree, and Doctor of Science degree. The thesis that he wrote for MA degree is a very small one. It's just an essay, a 40 pages essay, so it cannot be seen as a book. So let's focus on the 2 dissertations that he wrote. One was for his PhD degree, and the second one was for his Doctor of Science degree. The title of his thesis dissertation for PhD degree at Columbia University in the United States, it was Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. Evolution of Provincial Finance in British India. This was the title of his study. What do they do in that? I don't want to give you all the technical details, but I want everybody to understand that basically what was it that Dr. Ambedkar tried to do. See, at that time, we had the British government, the British government at the center, and there were provinces, what we call states now, they were called provinces. So, this is a book about the relationship, the financial relationship between British central government and the British provinces. Today, we have seen what the Modi government is doing. One of the most important issues today is the center-state financial relations. The Planning Commission was wound up. One of the reasons was that the new government would like to give the states a more important role. So that is happening. So center-state financial relation is a very important topic, and the seminal book, the first book on that subject, has been written by Dr. Ambedkar. That was his PhD dissertation. What did he do is that between the year 1800 to 1910, Dr. Ambedkar reviews how the relationship, the financial relationship between the British central government and the British states, provinces as they were called, how did that relationship evolve? And then at the end of the book, he discusses, Dr. Ambedkar discusses how that relation should be. So after describing how the relationship has evolved, he describes the principles that should govern the relationship between the central government and the states, to talk about in the language of today, center-state financial relations. That was the thesis. Now, what is the relevance of that today? As I was mentioning, Modi government is giving very special importance to that. That's one. But the second thing, and this is very, very important, you know, in our constitution, there is a provision for appointment of a finance commission. And so far, 14 finance commissions have come into being, and they come and for 2 years they work and they make recommendations. 14 Finance Commission. In fact, the 14th Finance Commission was headed by my one boss, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, our governor of RBI. And that report was submitted in December 2014. And before that, it was headed by Vijay Kirkar, it was headed by many other people, distinguished people. In fact, the 9th Finance Commission was headed by Yashwantrao Chauhan. So these Finance Commission, what do these Finance Commissions do? Basically what the Finance Commission do is to prescribe, to recommend how the tax and non-tax revenue which is collected by the central government, how it is to be shared between the center and the states. So how much of the tax revenue collected should be retained by the center, how much that is to be given to the states, what should be the principles governing the transfers from the central government to the states. That is basically, those recommendations are made by the Finance Commission. And I dare say that for all the 14 Finance Commission reports, by the way, Dr. Rangarajan became the 12th Finance Commission chief, and then he realized the importance of what Dr. Ambedkar had done. For all the 14 Finance Commission reports which have been presented until this date, the basic source of reference is Dr. Ambedkar's dissertation on provincial finance. Regrettably, we know about Finance Commission, but we do not know that the Finance Commission, the basic mooladhar, the basic source of the reference for all Finance Commission report has been the dissertation that Dr. Ambedkar wrote. That is his PhD dissertation. Let's now turn to his more provocative book on his Doctor of Science dissertation. The title of that is valid even today. The title of that title of his Doctor of Science dissertation was The Problem of Rupee, Its Origin and Solution. When I told that to Governor, he started smiling. He said, the problem continues even today, the problem of rupee and its solution. Dr. Ambedkar wrote this dissertation completed that in 1923. This is a major contribution of Dr. Ambedkar to what is called monetary economics. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar wrote 22 books in his life. All are great books, but if you have to make a list, and you want to, if I have to make a list of preference, I think Dr. Ambedkar's best book is Buddha and Dhamma, and the second best book would be Annihilation of Caste, and the third best book would be The Problem of Rupee. The problem with the book is that it is an extraordinarily difficult book. I'm yet to meet even a professor of economics who will tell me with confidence, with his hand on his chest, that he has understood the book. It's a difficult one. But I'll tell you, so what I'm going to do is a highly technical book. What I'm going to do is to make it simple for you to understand what is the content of the book. There are two parts in the book. What does Dr. Ambedkar do is to, first of all, he gives a historical review, a very insightful historical review of how rupee as a medium of exchange has evolved for 120 years, from 1800 to 1921. How rupee as a medium of exchange has evolved. That is one part. The second part, which is very, very important, is that he discusses the issue of what is the ideal currency system for a developing country like India. And this is a very, very important issue. Those of you who have studied economics at some point of time would certainly will know one name, the most famous economist of that century, that was John Maynard Keynes. But most people do not know that Dr. Ambedkar had a very important debate with John Maynard Keynes. And in fact, in the context of India, what Ambedkar was saying turned out to be true, and what Keynes was saying turned out to be false. Let me explain to you very briefly. Please understand, try to understand. Applause is not warranted. Think and understand. That's the most important thing. when there was a debate going on about what is the ideal currency system for a country like, developing country like India, there were two prime candidates. I'm oversimplifying for those of you, for everybody to understand. There were two alternate choices. One was gold standard and the second one was gold exchange standard. The difference between gold standard and gold exchange standard was to put it very simply, in a very simple language, under gold standard, gold coins are themselves used as a medium of exchange, whereas under gold exchange standard, it is not the gold that is used as the medium of exchange, but paper currency is used as a medium of exchange, and that is backed, that is supported, backed by certain amount of gold held with the central bank like Reserve Bank of India of the country. So that can be seen as one of the critical difference between the gold standard and the gold exchange standard. Keynes came to India in 1909 and he wrote a very good book on India. He was a great economist, no doubt. So while debating, he said that for a country like India, it's the gold standard is no good. What is required for a country like India is gold exchange standard. Gold exchange standard, he said, for a developing country like India, gold exchange standard is decidedly better. And what was his reasoning? His reasoning made a lot of sense. He said that under gold standard, you are connecting the affairs of mankind with the wheel of nature. Because under gold standard, every country will have only that much amount of currency as the amount of gold that they have. If they have more gold, there will be more currency. They have less gold, there will be less currency. Because gold is itself used as a currency. That, he said, was a very rigid standard. On the other hand, gold exchange standard, he said, has a virtue of flexibility. There, government can alter the amount of money that is available or money in circulation because it is a paper currency. Paper currency backed by gold, so it is possible for the government to show flexibility in a matter of creation of currency. And that, he said, for a developing country like India, that is decidedly an advantageous system because it gives a discretion. When Keynes took that view, you can imagine every small and big economist of our country took that line, and that was the line taken by everybody. The one person who opposed that was Dr. Ambedkar. His argument was that, he said, I agree with Keynes that the gold exchange standard offers the flexibility. But his argument was that this flexibility is a double-edged weapon. Dudhari astra ahete. It is a double-edged weapon. Both is a double-edged weapon in the sense that it can be good, it can be bad. Why it would be good? It would be good because it gives a flexibility. But it is bad, he said, if there is an irresponsible government which is relentlessly issuing, limitlessly issuing the currency. So if the government is irresponsible, this gives a weapon in the hand, it gives a sword in the hand of a monkey. In the sense that, these were my words, these are not the words that he used, but he would have used even stronger words. But his argument basically was that if the government is irresponsible, the irresponsible government will issue far too much money, and if there is too much money generated in the economy, that would create too much money creates too much money chasing too few goods, and the result we all know is inflation. And therefore, he thought that gold exchange standard would be inflationary, and there would be too much inflation, and inflation is the most iniquitous form of taxation. It hurts the poor the most, and therefore, he said that gold exchange standard is not something that should be desirable. Interestingly, in 1926, there was a commission, the Royal Commission came to India, and this was called Hilton Young Commission. The chairman of that was Sir Hilton Young, so it was called Hilton Young Commission. What was the purpose of the commission? That commission came to India to decide what kind of central bank, that is, what kind of reserve bank. You know, we have a bank called central bank. That's not a central bank. In economic sense, central bank is a bank which has the power to issue currency. Central bank of the country. In India, it is called the Reserve Bank of India. So he came basically, this commission was appointed basically for establishing the Reserve Bank of India to prepare a report, and they came to consult everybody concerned. Dr. Ambedkar had returned from United States and with his higher education, with all those great degrees. He had returned in 1923, and this Hilton Young Commission came in 1926, and Dr. Ambedkar gave a testimony before that commission, which is extremely important, very, very insightful, very, very insightful testimony that Dr. Ambedkar made. In fact, that testimony was not available in the record, and those of you who are aware of the big volumes that Maharashtra government has prepared, Vasant Moon was the man who was really working very hard, and Vasant Moon came to RBI once, and with Vasant Moon and me, I took him to our archives. Whole day we tried, and finally we got the copy of the testimony, which has been now printed in one of those volumes. And that testimony is very important. And on the basis of the recommendations of that Hilton Young Commission, 8 years later in 1935, the Reserve Bank of India was established. So in a way, Dr. Ambedkar played a role in establishment of the Reserve Bank of India also. Not that all his ideas were accepted, but the point is very clear that he played a role, and he kept on arguing that there must be a discretion that should be left to the central bank, and that discretion in the issue of currency is very important, creation of credit is very important. If the discretion is not there, there would be an unbridled expansion of currency and credit, and that would be leading to inflation, which will hurt the poor the most. So that is the background. Now that book, now coming back 50 years later, I will just mention this in passing. When Ambedkar made that argument, nobody paid any attention. They went by what Keynes was saying. What happened in the 1993, he made those recommendations in 1926. So nearly 65, 70 years later, in 1993, something very interesting happened. That time I was the secretary to the Central Board of Directors of Reserve Bank of India, and I actually saw the correspondence. You see, in India, RBI does not have individual units, right? Individual accounts. You can't go to RBI and open an account. It's a banker's bank, central bank. But all states have an account. And most importantly, central government has an account there. According to the RBI Act, do you know that the central government must maintain a balance of 50 crore rupees in their account? They have to have a minimum balance. They cannot allow the balance to go below 50 crore. That is the condition that was valid, and for a very long time there was absolutely no problem. What happened in the 1955-56 was that the government started finding it very, very difficult to maintain that balance of 50 crore. Now, just to give you an example, suppose that the then Prime Minister, suppose that the balance is exactly 50 crore, and the then Prime Minister wanted to make an announcement in a Red Fort speech that 10 crore rupees were a lot of money at that time. The schemes were very small. So suppose that he wanted to, and there was no money. So how to get around that? As we all know, we are very good at circumventing the law. So what we did was, what was done, and this is all documented. This is not figment of imagination. This is all documented. The then Secretary of the Reserve Bank of India and the then Finance Secretary came together and made an arrangement that what we will do is that whenever the balance is going below 50 crore, Reserve Bank will issue credit on the basis of IOUs issued by the government. So government will issue what was called ad hoc treasury bills of that amount. For example, suppose the balance is 50 crore and government wants to give a check of 10 crore. So what they will do is that government will issue an ad hoc treasury bill against which RBI will give a credit of 10 crore rupees. So 60 crore balance will be there, 10 crore check will be passed without violating the law. So this was a simple solution that was found. But what happened is this, whatever begins with a small way, it becomes a big thing later on. Can you imagine between the year 1955 to 1995, 40 years to preserve that balance of 50 crore rupees, can you imagine how much the total amount of ad hoc treasury bills were issued? You will be surprised. To maintain a balance of 50 crore in those 40 years, 1,08,000 crore rupees worth of ad hoc treasury bills were issued. So RBI had become like a Kamadhenu. Anywhere, whenever government wanted money, they would go to RBI and milk RBI, and RBI will issue the credit. This is exactly what Ambedkar had warned. He had said that there must be some control on the Reserve Bank of India that you are going to create. The Reserve Bank name was not decided. He said the central bank that you are creating, that should have some limit on the extent of credit that they will extend to the government of India. If there is no discretion, if there is no kind of control, then the currency issue and credit expansion would become relentless, and that will be detrimental. So what he was saying in 1926, using the language of that time, became valid in 1995. We recognize that, and again, you can check. In 1994, there was an agreement made between the Reserve Bank of India and the Finance Ministry, and the Finance Secretary was Montague Ahluwalia, my boss, and the person who was the governor of RBI was Narendra Jadhav. They made an agreement that the credit that is expanded to the central government would be gradually phased out. And they decided the amount, how it would be phased out over a period of time, and that happened. In other words, it took us 67 years to understand what Dr. Ambedkar was saying in 27. We understood, we accepted, we implemented. It is just that we do not know that this was something which was told by Ambedkar 67 years earlier than that. Now this is the tragedy, I feel. So that is his, Dr. Ambedkar's scholarly contribution. Dr. Ambedkar returned, having covered this part 1, let's turn to the part 2, his professional contribution after coming back to India. One of them I have already told you in terms of what he did in terms of giving a testimony to the Hilton Young Commission. If you look at Dr. Ambedkar's analysis of India's economic problems, all his speeches are replete with thoughts on economics. All his memoranda that he submitted to the British government and later to Indian government, they are replete with thoughts which are economic. But he did not write any book on economics per se. In 1927, he became member of the Bombay, that time Bombay province was there, Bombay Legislative Council. He was a nominated member. And then in 1937, when the first provincial elections took place, he became an MLA, and he was there as an MLA for some time until 1942. So during that period, in the Bombay Provincial Council first and then Assembly, you should look at the analysis of Dr. Ambedkar made on the budgets of the provincial budgets. The most perceptive analysis with all facts and figures. And remember, that was not an era of internet, so you could not Google and find out information. But the amount of analysis that he made and the amount of data that he collected, cross-country perspective, he would offer, very, very perceptive, and all those speeches are replete with all those ideas. Agriculture, he made some very important contribution in agriculture. He had written a paper about the small holdings and their consolidation, which is supposed to be very important. Also, he combined that with the social movement. And two things, Mahar Watan was one of the issues, and Khoti system was another one. Khoti system was a form of zamindari system that prevailed in western part of Maharashtra, particularly in Konkan area. And you know, Khoti system was a zamindari system and against the landless labor, and they were exploited ruthlessly. And Dr. Ambedkar not only organized them together, outside he organized them, inside the council he fought for them, and finally the Khoti system was abolished many years later, but that was something that was pursued by Dr. Ambedkar relentlessly. Another thing was Mahar Watan. This was a very important contribution that Dr. Ambedkar made in terms of abolition of Mahar Watan, because Mahar Watans had made these very last right of society complacent, and they thought that they were chosen ones because they were called Watandars. Actually, it was nothing but a dignified form of beggary, and he wanted to change that, and he wanted them to have the self-respect. So he did that very difficult job of convincing people that we should give it up, and fought with the government to cancel that, and that also happened many years later. These are his contributions. His contribution as a labor leader is something which is very, very interesting. Remember that in the 20s, there were many strikes in Mumbai, because there were textile mills, and there were thousands of workers. There were many strikes. Uniformly, he took a position against the strikes. And he was in fact one of the trade union leaders. Mumbai Nagarpalika Karmachari Union. He was the president of that. So he opposed all the strikes. And that time the leftist movement was very strong, and all the strikes were called by the leftist parties, and they were very angry and they were very agitated, and they called him traitor. Traitor is the word that was used against him because he would oppose it. But came the year 1938 when the then Bombay government came out with a new law that was called black law, Kala Kaida, because that was depriving people, the workers, of their right to strike. Now that is where Dr. Ambedkar struck. And he was basically a democratic person at the core. And he said that no matter what, I will not allow this right to strike to be withdrawn. And then he joined all other parties. Not only he joined all other opposition parties, he led the opposition, and they fought against this so-called Kala Kaida, or Black Act, that was being done by the Bombay government at that time. In 1936, he entered politics formally. Earlier, what he was doing was in the nature of social movement, but a formal entry into politics was the establishment of a party, and he called that Independent Labour Party. And at that time, he was asked why should the leftist people were very annoyed, as always, and they thought that, what is this? Where is the need to have another party? And why is this fellow calling it an Independent Labour Party? His argument is very important. He said that while all the trade unions organized by the communists, they are all fighting for the rights of the workers, they are keeping quiet about the human rights of the workers. Because they are concerned with the workers. But they are not saying anything about the human rights of the workers, because they feel that if they get into this, the support from the so-called high caste workers is going to wane, and therefore they were not entering that part. Dr. Ambedkar said that his party is an independent labor party, in the sense that it is a party which will not only fight for the rights of labor, it would also fight for their human rights. because that was consistent with his philosophy, and that was his explanation. And it was this Independent Labour Party which won 15 seats when the first provincial election took place at the provincial level, and Ambedkar was of course one of them, and that is where he made another contribution in the Mumbai Legislative Assembly. Later on, he did so well that in 1942 something happened. He emerged as a very influential, perceptive and thoughtful labor leader. By 1941, it was from the state level, he was moving to the central government level, and in 1942, something really big happened. The British government established in their own ministry, taking some people, Indians also in the ministry. It was not called ministry, it was called the council, it was called Viceroy's Executive Council. And in the 12 members which were there, Ambedkar was chosen for the first time as the minister, as the labor, they used to call it member, like planning commission. They are called, although they are ministers, they are called members. Niti Aayog, they are also called members, they are actually ministers. So, labor member, Dr. Ambedkar was chosen as a part of that ministry, and he was given very, very important portfolios. He was given the portfolio of labor. Along with labor, so he was the first labor minister, so to say, in the British Indian government that took place in 1942. He was the member of labor, minister of labor. Along with labor, he had PWD, which is very interesting. PWD and power. So those days, they were small departments, they were not the big ministries. So he had labor and employment. Along with that, he had power, he had water management, and he had public works department. So these are all very, very important ministries. And he made a remarkable contribution as a minister from 1942 to 1946. He played that role, and this is again an aspect about which very little is understood or known, but facts are now coming out gradually. But you know, Dr. Ambedkar becoming a labor minister has a very interesting social context. When Dr. Ambedkar was a little boy, and when his family was living in Satara for some time, and when his father decided to remarry, Ambedkar's father decided to remarry, he hated somebody else coming as his mother, and he hated it, and he was very, very unhappy. He was a small boy, little boy. So he decided to run away from Satara, and he decided to go to Mumbai. And he wanted to be a textile mill worker. Can you imagine? Little Biwa, he was called Biwa. So little Biwa wanted to become a textile worker, so he wanted to run away from his family in Satara to go to Mumbai. And 3 times he tried to steal money from the aunt with whom he used to sleep in the night. You know, so he tried to steal some coins from, there was a small purse attached to her, like those old ladies used to have that. And he tried to steal some coins so as to get the fare to go to Mumbai. Fortunately for us, that poor aunt never had any money in her batwa. So he could never get money to go to Mumbai. And the person, little Biwa, who was dreaming to go to Mumbai and become a textile mill worker, became the labor minister of our country. Now that is, that change that you know, labor and employment, there are many things that he did as the Minister for Labor and Employment. Let me just give you some example. All of these are going to be shocking to everybody. Employment exchange. We all know employment exchange. Everybody is connected with employment exchange at some point or other. Who started the employment exchanges in India? It was Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar who started employment exchanges. Now there is so much talk about skill development, right? First time our government, Modi government, has established a separate ministry of skill development. Who started the skill development in our country first? Both names, you know, everybody will get this answer wrong. In public sector, first efforts of skill development were done by Dr. Ambedkar, and in private sector, You know, nobody can guess this. In private sector, the first person who did skill development was Rabindranath Tagore. After Shanti Niketan, he started Sri Niketan, which was the first skill development school. So in private sector, it is Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, and in public sector, in skill development, it is Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. That was his contribution. Now, his contribution to other fields, if you see, in terms of water management, PWD, many big dams, and Dr. Ambedkar was not an engineer. He, in fact, never liked mathematics. But he learned all the technical details, and many big dams, many projects, which were engineered, he would get the best people in the world. In fact, he wanted to replicate the Tennessee Valley in India in terms of Damodar Valley, and for that, Dr. Ambedkar hired the same person as the chief engineer who was working in Tennessee Valley. He was invited to India by Dr. Ambedkar, and many projects actually bear his hard work. Some other people have taken credit, but it bears Dr. Ambedkar's hard work, and that is something that we must recognize. Water management, you know, connecting rivers, you know, there is so much talk, Suresh Prabhu later on talking. Who talked about connecting rivers first? Particularly the Kosi River and some part of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. It was Dr. Ambedkar who talked about that, connecting the rivers. Power, he played a very important role in the power sector in terms of basically laying down the rules. In the labor, another very important contribution of Dr. Ambedkar is this tripartite arrangement between, you know, the negotiations which take place, tripartite between the owners, government and the trade unions. Who laid the framework of this tripartite arrangement? It was Dr. Ambedkar and the labor minister. So, you know, it goes on and on and on. Dr. Ambedkar then after that, when India became independent, we all know that he was the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution of India. He was the first law minister of the independent India, and he was also the main person for the Constitution, the principal architect, in the sense that he was the chairman of the drafting committee. While he was doing that, let me say this, this is again not very widely known. Dr. Ambedkar had worked so much in the area of planning and finances and his training in economics. When the Planning Commission came about in 1950, do you know that Dr. Ambedkar was very keen that he should be the chief of the Planning Commission? And he tried very hard, but a lot of people were very uneasy about him, including Pandit Nehru, and he was never given the job. If you see the letter of resignation from the cabinet, Ambedkar resigned on 27th September 1951 when he had serious differences of opinion about passage of Hindu Code Bill. Hindu Code Bill was the biggest reform that could have taken place in our country, biggest social reform, fundamental reform, and he fought for that for nearly 3.5 to 4 years. But when he was finally convinced that this is not going to pass, he decided to call it a day. He resigned on 27th October, I think, September, 27th September of 1951, and he walked out of the cabinet. Today, if you ask everybody, and this is the School of Social Sciences, if you ask your students, name 5 people who have worked for gender equality. Ask any students in any group. You will find that none of them will say it was Dr. Ambedkar. None of them. You will take name of Phule, of course, which is very, very important. Savitribai Phule, of course, very, very important. But in those people, you should take Dr. Ambedkar's name because the biggest transformational thing that was being done through the Hindu Code Bill was by Dr. Ambedkar, and he was the only person who left the job of a cabinet minister when he could not achieve the goal of gender equality. Now, and we don't look at him as a person who was the champion of gender equality. No, we don't. This is what is really very, very painful to see. But be that as it may, when he left, when he was working on the Constitution, As I mentioned before, many provisions in the Constitution are there because the principal architect of the Constitution was a lawyer. Finance Commission is one. If you see the directive principles of state policy, which were formulated and put, that's a unique contribution of our Constitution. They are all based on the socio-economic philosophy of Dr. Ambedkar. That is what he was trying to propagate. So there are many provisions in our constitutions which are there, which have an imprint of Dr. Ambedkar as an economist. I come to this last major point that I want to make is that Dr. Ambedkar was the first economist, in my opinion, who looked at the economic dimensions of the social maladies in our country, like caste system. He is the first one, and there hasn't been anybody that influential. He looked at, as a student of economics and as a person concerned with the social development, he looked at the economic basis or economic dimension of caste system. And remember, this was a period in the 30s particularly, was a period when lot of old things were coming back in a new guise, and a new justification was being given. You know, this was a kind of resurrection of something of the sort which I dare say is happening even today. You know, a lot of people, there were theories given that why should you have a pigtail? The justification that was given, and this is documented. The pigtail, if you have a pigtail, it creates an electromagnetic field around you. This has been the justification given. So resurrection, and they said, why should you take a dip in the Ganges? Because the water of Ganges has a certain kind of capacity to kill the bacteria. Absolute nonsense. But this was put out, so all the old things, you know, were being given a new justification. That was the time when Dr. Ambedkar gave a hard-hitting critique of the caste system. And my second favorite book of his is Annihilation of Caste. This was supposed to be a speech. You know, Jat Paat Todak Mandal, there was this organization in Lahore which wanted to invite him as the president for that year, 1936. And so this was a convention which was going to be in Lahore, and Dr. Ambedkar accepted it, and they wanted him to write on caste, so he wrote his piece, and then they said that you must send your draft of your speech so that we can get it published. So he sent it to them, and when they read it, they fainted because it was so strong but irrefutably argued. Beautiful, brilliant analysis, but also argued with legal precision and with a very deep study that he had written that. And he had taken a position that there is no way you can annihilate, finish the caste system. If you want to do that, you will have to bomb the Shastra. Shastras have to be bombed. Then alone, this is going to change. Now when they read, they said, ye to challe wala hai nahi. You know, their thing was simple. They were doing Jatpa Todak Mandal, but little bit here, little bit there. Nothing revolutionary they wanted. So this was too difficult for them to digest. So they wrote to Ambedkar and said, you know, Dr. Saab, you please delete this para. You isko thoda change kijiye, usko ye kariye. Dr. Ambedkar said, I am not going to change a single word. Take it or leave it. If you want me to come, this is going to be my speech. And then they said, in that case, we'll have to cancel the conference because we can't hold the conference. He said, you cancel it. What he did was, he published the speech which was prepared but not delivered, and that is this short book called Annihilation of Caste. This was the book on which there was a very interesting debate between Ambedkar and Gandhi. They had many debates, but I find this debate the most interesting one. In this debate, you see, he wrote this book, book was published in 1936. Within 2 months after that, Mahatma Gandhi wrote 2 articles criticizing this book, 2 articles in his Young India, which was later called Harijan. In this, his magazine, he wrote 2 articles criticizing Ambedkar and defending the caste system. Now this is very, very difficult to understand that actually Mahatma Gandhi defend is justified. Again, this is a matter of documentation, anybody can see that. He defended the Varnashram system, and the argument that he made was that what is wrong with this? This is nothing but division of labor. This is what economists call it, division of labor. That, you know, certain kind of people will do this kind of work, other kind of people will do other kind of work. So this is division of labor. And every society, he said, Gandhiji argued, requires a division of labor. It is a time-honored principle of economics. This is what Gandhiji said. To which you should see the hard-hitting reply given by Dr. Ambedkar. And while publishing this book, what he does is, the book is published with the correspondence with Jatpat Todak Mandal, and then afterwards Mahatma Gandhi's critical comments and his rebuttal. All of that is put together as a book, later editions. Very, very interesting and revealing. So, when Bapuji defended the caste, the Varnashram system, you know, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, this division, 4-fold classification, when it was defended, Dr. Ambedkar said that this is not division of labor. In a way, he was saying that I don't need Mahatma Gandhi to teach me economics, because Mahatma Gandhi was not trained in economics, he was. He said this is not a division of labor. And his argument was that this division is something which has done irreparable damage to our system and our economic growth, because only Brahmin, you know, a son of a Brahmin, his job would be to learn and teach. Only a son of a, so those who have qualities of head, they would be doing the job of teaching and learning, Brahmins. Those who are not necessarily good in their mind, but those who are strong and sturdy, they would be doing the defending of the country, Kshatriya. Then those who do not have the qualities of head or heart, but those who have good quality of what we call street smartness, they will be Vaishya. And those who are good for nothing, they will be Shudras, you know, service class. And then Dalits will come even below that. So he said that this is a division which is an extremely artificial division. This is a man-made division not given by Shastras. Shastras are trying to defend it, but it is a man-made division, and most importantly, this is not a division of labor, because a son of a Brahmin, even if he is a hopeless vagabond, nobody will deny him the right to learn and earn, or to preach. On the other hand, a son of an untouchable, no matter how brilliant he was, he would never be given the job of, you know, learning and teaching. So he has to do the menial task. The task is assigned based on the caste. And that's why Dr. Ambedkar compared this with a tower which has 4 stories and no movement, there is no staircase, there is no lift. You can't move from one floor to another. You have to die on the floor on which you are born. This is not division of labor. What he said was, this is not a division of labor, but superimposed on division of labor is the division of laborers. Division of labor is natural, but division of laborers is not natural, and this division has done irreparable damage to the economic growth of this country. This was the argument. After that, Gandhiji had nothing to add, because it could not go on. And that was a brilliant reply that he gave. So one of the most important contributions of Dr. Ambedkar is that he gave first time the economic dimensions of the caste system and untouchability in our country. After that, we all know that he gave a memorandum to the government. He had earlier, 1947, states and minorities, where he gave his plan and program. That took a position. A lot of people talk about that. Actually changed his position later. At that time, while writing the states and minorities, he took a position that nationalization, basic heavy industry should be nationalized, and there should be contract farm, and there should be, farming to be collective farming, and so on. Later on, he changed that position and he became a social democrat rather than this leftist-oriented idea. From 1950, after his resignation, he remained as a member of Rajya Sabha until his Mahaparinirvan in 1956. During that period, you should see the contributions that he made in Rajya Sabha. He contested Lok Sabha election twice but couldn't make it. And it's a very sad part that he could not, he was defeated in Mumbai in 1952, first general election. And then he also contested in 1954, a by-election from Bhandara, in both places. In fact, in Bhandara, they purposely put out against him a candidate who was only 7th standard pass. And he defeated Dr. Ambedkar. This was the political dimension of that. Again, it originally goes back to the Pune Pact. Pune Pact that was again based on a big debate between Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Ambedkar. But during that period, he made several contributions in that last phase too, while he was gravitating towards Buddhism during that period. But in Rajya Sabha, he made very important speeches on the problems of scheduled caste. He made many important speeches on the constitutional amendments. He made very important speeches on the report, first report, 1953 report of the Scheduled Caste, Commissioner of Scheduled Caste at the time. And again, he was a kind of sage Rishi who was there in the parliament for all important issues. That was the time when he, towards the end of his life really, before conversion, he handled one very, very important issue which became again very important later. See, in 1955, there was the States Reorganization Commission. And all the states in our country, they were reorganized on the lingual basis. Bhashavar Prantarachana is the word that is used in Marathi or Sanskrit. What was done was, see the prophetic genius that he was. Fazal Ali Commission recommended that there should be one state, one language. One state, one language. No, they said one language, one state. Remember, this is a very, very important difference. One language, one state, and one state, one language. Fazal Ali said that there should be one language, one state. And that was accepted, and all the states were reorganized in our country based on the language. So what was the obvious thing to have happened? In North India, there were big states, all Hindi speaking, coming together, so big states. In South India, there were many small states. And Dr. Ambedkar said this is dangerous because this is going to create a problem between North and South. And this will create a secessionary tendencies later. So he said that rather than having the principle of one language, one state, it should be one state, one language. See, please understand the difference between one language, one state. One language, one state would mean that all people speaking one language should be there in one state. Fine. Ambedkar was saying the opposite. He said that within a state, they should speak more or less one language, which is different. In other words, many big states would be broken up. And he specifically recommended 3 breakups. 2 of which have happened. He talked about breaking up of central provinces, which has happened in 2002, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh were created. He recommended breakdown of Bihar. That also happened in the year 2002. Bihar was divided into Bihar and Jharkhand. Then he also recommended trifurcation, division into 3 of Uttar Pradesh, which comes up again and again but has not happened, but sooner or later that is going to happen.